So Jason, please introduce yourself, how you came to crypto, and give us a brief summary of what you do at Alchemy.
Yeah, happy to. So first of all, thank you for having me here. My path to crypto was, I guess like many people, it wasn't super direct, so I spent quite a bit of time in TradFi doing due diligence and marketing and strategy, and after a while I was ready for a new challenge and just became really fascinated by research. And so decided to do that on hard mode. So I was lucky enough to get into a PhD program, and while I was there I really wanted to study how technology is changing like really core fundamental institutions. Like we were all sort of talking about digital transformation, this is back in 2017, but it was a very vague term, and so I really wanted to understand this relationship between technology and institutions. And while I was starting the PhD, I happened to be a TA for a class on the internet and public policy, where Ed Felton was one of the co-professors, which is a remarkable coincidence, and ended up having to teach the Bitcoin white paper, and just fell down the rabbit hole from that. It was just an incredible, like for someone, there's, we think of it as a computer science paper, but there's so much social science in that paper that was what really pulled me in. And so I ended up writing my thesis on sort of the social organization of the technology and how people organize to put together a new technology and get it on its feet, and what's unusual about that. And so after I did that, I was lucky enough to get a role as governance lead at a DAO, and I worked at a DeFi DAO. And from there, I've gone on to work at Alchemy, where I am now. So my title is protocol specialist, but what that really means is we engage with so many protocols, and as those protocols continue to decentralize, we need to think more constructively about how to sort of play positive sum games as an ecosystem actor. So that's really what I focus on.
Cool. Okay, so in your PhD you describe blockchain as both a potential and an emergent GPT, general purpose technology. So can you take us through what that means and some of the aspects of blockchain which are maturing and being more standardized?
Yeah, sure, happy to. And first of all, thank you for reading the thesis. As we were saying earlier, I think you're probably one of 3 people. So, so GPT is a really cool concept. It comes from economic history, and the idea is there are certain technologies that are really special because they go all over the place. They have tons of applications, and lots of people get involved in building on them because there's incentives to do so, and it just sort of becomes a self-propelling cycle. And so the idea of the thesis was, what if we could study one of those at its beginning, before everything becomes standardized? It's interesting looking back. So I finished that in 2021, and even since then, the rate of change has been incredible. And so sometimes it feels funny to talk about things being standardized in a space that's still moving so quickly. But I also think we can see a lot of signs that things are maturing. So areas like, it wasn't that long ago when you would think about traditional institutions and enterprises, and it was just endless proofs of concept and wasn't clear whether anything was happening. And now what we're seeing, just even over the last year, is that a lot of enterprises are entering the space, and they're entering the space in ways that are really strategically important to them. So we can think about cloud providers becoming node providers in blockchain networks. We can think about major brands using NFTs as loyalty points and really embedding it deep into their marketing. Obviously with tokenization and things going on there. So there's a lot going on that's really it's becoming enmeshed with the real world in really important ways. I also think that stablecoins have clearly become a standard in terms of payments, and maybe one of our most successful products for the space overall. And then the last thing I would say is, and it's been a theme of this conference, but we're seeing this move from, where traditionally we've been used to thinking about chains as individual things, and now we're looking at working across chains. So we have things like Ethereum starting to develop these RIPs, these sort of roll-up improvement proposals that work across the whole space, or things like your relays, or things like Chainlink CCIP. Like there are a lot of standards that are starting to emerge for working across chains that are super exciting, and I think are a sign of serious maturing in the space.
Cool. So how do coordination and control, that's another term that you use in your PhD, how do they manifest in the transformative social potential of blockchain?
Yeah, it's funny, when you write these things for social scientists, you have to use their language, and so coordination and control are like very standard, very established sort of terms in organization theory, which is why I use them, but I think they do say a lot about, if you've got these established ways of thinking about organizing, what's cool about blockchain is it lets you transform how each of those work. So in the case of coordination, it's commonplace to us. You think about a blockchain project and there's the protocol, there's a foundation, there's a development company, a labs company, there's a DAO. That's really unusual to have that many different kinds of organization involved in a single project. And so that kind of coordination is something striking, and that's continued as DAOs have become more sophisticated. In terms of control, I probably would have written that part differently, but I really, we talk about governance and it's this really loaded word that implies really top-down, and yet it's much more interesting and nuanced than that. But I think that governance, which is where I spend a lot of my time, is somewhere in between coordination and control, I'd say, and still being negotiated.
How has that thesis of your PhD kind of been supported or questioned by working in the space for a company like Alchemy?
Sure. Yeah, so it highlights for me what I missed in the dissertation, right? So companies like Alchemy, like in the dissertation I focused on individual projects, and I didn't have as much of a perspective because I was working at a very high level on infrastructure providers that provide really important services across the space. And so that was something I missed in my analysis and that I've been really excited to participate in and learn about, because you get just a really, as someone with a research mindset and who's really curious, you get a phenomenal perspective on the whole space in a way that you wouldn't if you were just looking at one project.
Yeah. Okay. So Alchemy is also considered Web3 critical infrastructure, at least from my perspective. So how do you deal with the kind of security behind that, where you have to deal with hardware, software, networking, and so on?
Yeah, we have a big security team and we take it very, very seriously. So you can almost think about it as sort of separated into two broad areas. So one area is anything involving accepting money from customers. We make sure that we're up on every possible certification and we function as close to being like a bank as possible in terms of our security. In terms of working with nodes and hardware and software, we work very hard. Obviously as infrastructure we have to be live and we have to be available, so we make sure and build in redundancies and backups. We make sure that we're keeping everything sort of nailed down in terms of who has access to what. And yeah, we also, so we're, no company's an island, so we also rely on our own provider, our own, not infra providers, but our service providers, and so we make sure that we apply the same level of expectation for uptime to them as we have for ourselves. And then I think we'll get to this in a bit when we talk about other things, but we've been...
So there are a lot of projects where security is an afterthought, and what's your opinion on that, and how does Alchemy particularly overcome it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably all have the same opinion about projects that don't take it seriously. It's table stakes. You really have to take it very seriously, and so we've been, moving forward with the space as we develop our projects. We've been paying a lot of attention to that. So, for example, we've been working over the past year on building a suite of account abstraction offerings, which are rooted in smart contracts, so we've made sure to, there's what seems like a trade-off between moving quickly and moving securely, and we've just defaulted to moving securely. So for example, for our launches of our embedded accounts and our modular accounts, we've gone through 2 to 3 audits for each, and we have a bug bounty active right now, and we'll continue to do everything we can to make sure that's as secure as possible because, yeah, as I said, it's table stakes.
Fair enough. Okay, and in the past, you played an instrumental role in running a DAO. So what were your key learnings from that experience, and how do you expect the role of DAOs to progress from this point onwards, where they're becoming quite fundamental to Web3?
So that was a fascinating thing to do right out of the PhD, because it was really an immersion in, all right, you've studied what it seems like, now let's see what it actually is. And so I think the main learning from that experience was that you have all this change happening sort of in the environment, with markets are constantly changing, regulations are changing, the technology itself is changing really quickly. And because of that, you've got all these stakeholders who may only be interested in one piece of that. And so aligning their interests is incredibly important, and it's something that has to evolve over time. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And so the things that I think are really exciting are, now we have DAOs operating on a scale that we just couldn't even have imagined a few years ago. They have these enormous treasuries, and they're much more sophisticated in how they go about things. And so at a macro level, DAOs like Arbitrum DAO and Optimism and a lot of other sort of protocol DAOs are really coordinating enormous spaces of contributors in really exciting ways, and there's a lot of experimentation going on that I think is phenomenal. I'm also really excited about some of the mechanisms that are coming up, so things that kind of get us past slow-moving governance or governance that's just sort of stuck to a small group of stakeholders. So things like HATS protocol, where you can bring in different roles and attach rights to those roles beyond just, you're a token holder, you get a vote. It's much more sophisticated now. Joke Race is doing really cool things with gamification and contests, and you can also see DAOs, like I went to Arbitrum DAO's governance day yesterday, or I think it was yesterday, yeah. These days all blur together. And it was just phenomenal seeing what they're doing in terms of running parallel experiments and how to do grants, because nobody has the answer, but maybe there are lots of different answers that we can iterate on and experiment with and start putting together, and I think that work is happening now, which is great.
Okay. So just to round things off, what do you wish people understood about Alchemy and the services it provides more?
Yeah, one thing that's not visible from the outside that I've been just amazed by on the inside is the level of commitment to customers and to service, and I know that probably everybody says that, but just watching teams scramble when a customer has a question and seeing how that process just plays out over and over again. Scramble's maybe not the right word. The way that teams coalesce really quickly around, an issue, a question a customer has, it has really just been incredible to see. I'd also say that I've run into a lot of people talking here who say, oh, you do RPC nodes, right? And the space is constantly expanding and we're expanding with it. So as we move into, I mentioned earlier, account abstraction, and we're also expanding into more data services and also just trying to help the ecosystem step forward. So we're getting involved in open source standards and contributing to those and writing those and really doing what we can to help move the whole space forward, because as an infrastructure company, we move with the space. And if the space succeeds, we succeed. And if the space doesn't, we don't. So we're really committed to being all in this together with the ecosystem.
Perfect. So thank you for your time. That was a great interview. I'm really pleased to learn more about Alchemy. And yeah, let's wrap it up there.
It was great
have a great
chatting.
time at the conference.
Yeah, thank you. You too.
Pleasure.
Good.